My fiancé vanished the morning of our wedding. Then I discovered the pact he signed with his best friend. What happened next wasn't in their plan. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. We met at a summer music festival, bonded over our love for indie rock. And by the third day, I was convinced I met my soulmate. He asked if we could spend the week together. I said yes, instantly. When the week ended, we promised it wasn't goodbye. We started dating immediately. I ignored how fast it all felt because he seemed perfect. I overlooked his vague stories, missed calls and absences. I thought I was safe. He met my parents 6 weeks in, brought flowers for my mom, and charmed my dad over football talk. They loved him. When I asked to meet his family, he said they were complicated. I didn't push. He told me he'd never felt this way about anyone before. I believed every word. We made a scrapbook together of all our dates. He said it was our future in photos. Looking back, it was all perfectly staged. After we moved in, I noticed him texting late at night. He said it was work, but he always flipped his phone down. When I asked, he laughed it off, called me paranoid. Savannah started dropping by more without Cameron. She seemed nervous, always rushing off. Once, I saw her car parked around the corner after she said she left. I asked Nathaniel. He said she probably forgot something. I felt the cold drip of doubt. I planned a surprise weekend trip. He claimed he had to work and couldn't go. That Saturday, I saw a tag story of him at a brunch. Savannah was there too. He said it was Cameron's invite, and that I was overreacting. When I told Cameron, he seemed surprised, then brushed it off. They were just friends, he insisted. I wanted to believe that, but the way Savannah looked at Nathaniel, that wasn't friendship. It looked like longing. Savannah and I went dress shopping one day. She barely looked at anything, said she was tired. When I mentioned the honeymoon, she got tense. I joked, "You'd think you were marrying him," and she didn't laugh. Later Nathaniel asked what I said to her, said she cried. I apologized. Confused, Cameron shrugged it off. But he started acting cold too. I felt trapped in this weird fog of secrets and tension I couldn't explain. Wedding plans were in full swing, but Nathaniel grew distant. He skipped tastings, left vendor meetings early. He said work was insane, but I found receipts for dinners I wasn't at. When I questioned him, he turned it on me, asked if I was keeping tabs. He called me controlling. I cried in the bathroom after he left. Cameron texted later, checking in, saying Nathaniel seemed off lately. It was the first time someone else noticed. 2 weeks before the wedding, I overheard Nathaniel and Savannah whispering in the hallway. When I stepped out, they jumped apart. Savannah stammered something about returning shoes. Nathaniel said she just dropped by to help. I smiled, pretending not to notice, but my stomach twisted. Cameron called later to ask if I was okay. I lied, said I was just tired. He paused, then told me Savannah had stopped coming home some nights. I said nothing. The night before the rehearsal dinner, Nathaniel didn't come home, said he was with Cameron. Cameron said he hadn't seen him all week. I asked Nathaniel again, and he got angry, accused me of interrogation. He left, slamming the door. Savannah texted me later, saying, "Hope everything's okay." I stared at the message, wondering if it was mockery or guilt. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something was unraveling, and I didn't know how to stop it. On the morning of our wedding, my phone stayed silent. No good morning, no updates. I texted, called, nothing. My bridesmaids tried to distract me, but I felt something was wrong. Cameron arrived looking pale, clutching an envelope. "You need to read this," he said. It was from Nathaniel. A handwritten note. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I read every word, then looked up at Cameron. He whispered, "He left with her." My knees buckled. The letter detailed how Nathaniel and Savannah had fallen in love slowly, painfully, and couldn't deny it anymore. He wrote that he didn't want to lie through vows, said he hoped I'd find happiness, maybe even with Cameron, since you two have real chemistry. I nearly tore it up. Cameron didn't speak, just stood there like a ghost. I looked at the dress, the flowers, the silent guests arriving. Everything was ruined. I couldn't breathe right. My mom tried to hug me. I stepped back. I couldn't be touched. My dad asked if we should cancel the ceremony. I nodded slowly, then fled to the dressing room. I locked the door and stared at myself in the mirror. Makeup flawless, eyes empty. I whispered, "What's wrong with me?" over and over. Cameron texted, "I'm outside if you need to escape." For a second, I wanted to vanish, disappear into anywhere but here. I left through the back. Barefoot, still in my dress, Cameron was waiting by his car, eyes filled with sympathy. "Let's go," he said. No questions, no pity, just presence. We drove in silence for a while. I kept thinking he'd say something cruel, some twist, but he didn't. We stopped at a park. I sat on a bench and cried until my throat hurt. Cameron sat beside me, not touching, just staying. That meant everything. Later that evening, we returned to his apartment. I showered, wore his hoodie, and curled up on the couch. He made grilled cheese and didn't try to talk. Just handed me the plate and sat on the floor beside me. We watched old sitcoms. At one point, I laughed, a real laugh. It surprised both of us. Cameron looked over, startled. "You okay?" he asked gently. I shrugged, holding the plate tighter. "No, but I will be." The next day I woke up on Cameron's couch. My phone was full of messages, family, friends, even reporters. I turned it off. Cameron offered me coffee and a blanket. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. No pressure, just comfort. That morning, for the first time, I didn't feel like a failure. I was humiliated, heartbroken, but not alone. He didn't try to fix it. He just sat beside the wreckage with me. That week blurred. I didn't leave the apartment. Cameron stocked the fridge, set up guest Wi-Fi, and handed me his favorite books. He never hovered. Sometimes we ate together, sometimes not. One night I found him asleep on the floor, curled by the couch like a guard dog. I covered him with a blanket and whispered, "Thank you." He stirred but didn't awake. I realized then I wasn't rebuilding alone. Someone was choosing to stay beside me. A week later, Cameron handed me the pact Nathaniel and Savannah had written. I found it on his desk. "But you should see, it was typed, signed, even dated." They'd planned the betrayal for months. I laughed a sharp, bitter sound. "They really thought we'd just trade places?" I asked. Cameron nodded. "But we didn't." I folded the paper and threw it in the fireplace. "They don't get to script our lives," he just said. Exactly. Healing didn't happen overnight. I started going for walks again, wearing sunglasses to avoid stares. Cameron joined sometimes, quiet beside me. One afternoon, we stopped at a cafe, and the barista asked if we were a couple. I froze. Cameron chuckled and said, "We're just surviving." Later, I asked him what that meant. He shrugged. "It means I'm here as long as you need me." I didn't reply, but I squeezed his hand. It felt real. We started cooking dinners together. Bad ones at first, burnt pasta, raw chicken, but we laughed. We began sharing playlists. One night, a love song came on and we both froze. Cameron cleared his throat, changed it. "Too soon," he muttered. I nodded. But that night, when he fell asleep on the couch again, I kissed his forehead. He didn't stir, but his lips curved slightly. I whispered, maybe not too soon. I didn't regret it. Cameron and I started walking hand in hand without thinking. Friends began asking if we were dating. I'd shrug. He'd smile. We hadn't labeled it. One day, I got a package, no return address. Inside was my wedding scrapbook, mailed back from Savannah's old apartment. The last page was torn and Cameron found me staring at it. He didn't ask, just sat down and began adding new pages. Us at the park. Us laughing. Let's rewrite this, he said. One night, Cameron and I got caught in the rain walking home. We ran laughing, soaked to the skin. He wrapped his jacket around me at the door. I turned to say thank you, but he kissed me just once, gentle, no rush. We stared at each other. I whispered, was that a mistake? He shook his head. No, but we can pretend it was, if you need. I didn't. I pulled him inside instead. Weeks passed. We became something unspoken but solid. Then Nathaniel emailed, subject line closure. My hands trembled opening it. He said Savannah left him. He's made a huge mistake. Wanted to meet. I didn't reply. Cameron saw me reading it, said nothing. That night, I drafted a response. You lost the best parts of your life. Don't try to recycle them. I deleted it. Cameron and I watched TV. I leaned into his shoulder steady. Savannah messaged me next. We were stupid. He's not who I thought. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen numb. Cameron sat beside me silent. I replied too little. Too late. Blocked her. For the first time, I felt control again. Not rage, not pain, just clarity. Cameron said, proud of you. I smiled faintly. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about never letting them rent space in my life again. That felt powerful. Cameron invited me to his cousin's wedding. I hesitated, but went. At the reception, someone asked how we met. Through betrayal, I joked. Cameron laughed softly. Later he pulled me aside and said, you're the best decision I never planned. We danced. It wasn't perfect. I flinched when certain songs played. But he held me steady. In his arms, I felt like I wasn't defined by what fell apart. I was building something better, unexpected and whole. One evening, I found a small box on the kitchen counter. Inside was a charm shaped like a broken heart stitched together. Cameron said, it's not an engagement ring. Just acknowledgement. I teared up. It's perfect. We didn't need big gestures. We had board game nights, late night grocery runs, and shared playlists. Love didn't come in fireworks. It came in steady warmth. That charm stayed around my neck. A reminder of love after ruin. Our love. A friend posted an old wedding photo, me in my dress, alone at the altar. It went viral. People speculated. Some pitied, others mocked. I was mortified. Cameron commented, she rose anyway. The hate faded, the support didn't. Messages poured in, strangers saying I gave them hope. Cameron said, they see your strength. I wasn't ready to be a symbol, but I wasn't ashamed either. That moment became the final tear I let them own. Then, never again. Months passed. We took a trip upstate, no plans. Just drives and diner stops. One night, we camped under the stars. Cameron pointed at constellations, making up names. I laughed so hard I cried. He leaned over and kissed me slow. Sure, no second guesses, he said. I nodded. No ghosts. We lay there wrapped in one blanket. Hearts steady. The past was still real, but it no longer held us hostage. We were something new, unwritten, safe. On the anniversary of the wedding, that wasn't he. I expected a breakdown. Instead, Cameron handed me a blank notebook. Start something real, he said. I filled the first page. I survived. We spent the day watching movies, ordering takeout, laughing until our stomachs hurt. I didn't cry once. That night, I looked at him and said, this is my new story. He grinned. Then let's write it together. And for once, I believed in every word. We created a ritual: Friday night tacos and playlist swaps. One week, Cameron played a song I hadn't heard since the engagement. I froze. He paused it. Want me to skip? I shook my head. Let it play. I didn't flinch this time. I listened. Then added it to our playlist. Trauma became just a track, not the soundtrack. That night we danced in the kitchen laughing. Healing wasn't a straight line, but it had its music. One afternoon I saw Nathaniel at the grocery store. He froze. I didn't. I walked past him. Head high he followed. Tried to talk. I don't need your apology, I said, calm. I'm not your ending. Cameron found me at checkout. Everything okay, he asked. I smiled, better than ever. That night I journaled. Closure doesn't need their words. It needs your peace. I finally felt done, not bitter, just beautifully, finally finished with them. Cameron's mom invited me to dinner. Nervous I went. She hugged me tight and whispered, he's different with you. We ate, laughed, played board games. After dessert, she pulled me aside. Thank you for choosing joy after ruin, she said. That stuck with me. Joy wasn't loud, it was quiet dinners, slow forgiveness, shared laughter. I realized I'd chosen joy long before I understood it, and I was finally surrounded by people who saw that. I found an old voicemail from Savannah left the night before the wedding. She said, I hope you hate me. I deserve it. I deleted it. Not out of forgiveness, but indifference. Cameron was painting the bedroom when I told him. He smiled. You chose peace. I nodded. That night, I finally threw out the wedding binder. It wasn't sentimental, it was relief. Every discarded page made room for something real. Love earned, love lived, love chosen. A year later, Cameron and I visited the same festival where I met Nathaniel. It was bittersweet, but healing. We danced, laughed, shared funnel cake. He surprised me with a photo strip of us, just like the one I'd once glued in the old scrapbook. Let's overwrite every page, he said. We kissed under fireworks. I didn't think about who I lost, just who I found. And I found myself stronger, softer, and finally, fully loved. Cameron gifted me a new scrapbook blank. Leather-bound our next chapters, he said. I opened to the first page. It held a single Polaroid, us laughing in pajamas, flour on our faces from a failed baking night. Below it, he'd written, love is the story we choose to write. Every day, I smiled, tapped the spine, and said, let's fill it with joy, and I meant it. No more borrowed love, only what we build together. I used to measure love by promises and pictures. Now I measure it by peace. Cameron and I don't need big declarations. We choose each other in the quiet, in the ordinary, in the healing. I stopped waiting for apologies that never came. I started living, and I realized survival wasn't the end, it was the start of something truer, softer, and entirely mine. People ask if I'd do it all again, knowing how it ended. My answer, I wouldn't change a thing because it led me here. Heartbreak showed me my strength. Betrayal pushed me towards something better, towards someone better. I stopped chasing closure. I embraced growth. And in Cameron's arms I found not just love but home. The kind built after ruin, the kind that lasts. Nathaniel tried reaching out again publicly this time. A shared post, a sad caption. People tagged me, expecting a reaction. I gave none. My silence was louder than any response. Cameron and I hosted a small dinner that night. Surrounded by friends who knew our real story, love didn't need defending, it just needed living. And I finally understood justice wasn't his downfall, it was my happiness. Blooming in full view, Cameron proposed not with a ring, but with a key. Move in with me. No pressure, just a promise of here. I cried, laughed, and said yes. It wasn't flashy, it was safe, steady, honest, and that's what I wanted. Not fairy tales, foundations. We packed together, unpacked memories, built something new, and this time I knew I wasn't anyone's backup plan. I was the whole future, and it was finally mine to choose. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe to check out more stories on my channel.